Mandela had said he was only going to give one interview, but I found myself away into the bowels and the basement of this UN establishment.
I'll bet you did.
And I was confronted by the most dignified human being that I had ever seen in my whole life. This is Christiane Amanpour presents The X-Files with Jamie Rubin, and I'm Christiane.
And I'm Jamie Rubin.
And I'm a longtime correspondent and now anchor for CNN, where I have had a show for a long time trying to hold world leaders to account.
We also happen to be a married couple. We were married for 20 years. We've been divorced now for 7. Thus the title, The X-Files.
Yep. And we thought if we can talk together and address some of these incredible problems from all sorts of different perspectives, notably his from government, mine from journalism, then anybody can, and maybe even world leaders, because a lot needs to be talked through, hashed out, and sorted. So let's get started. What is it? Is it the foreign policy of personality? Is it grievance? Certainly there's a lot of humiliation to a lot of the foreign leaders who are coming. What does it really mean for America and its attempt to make deals? For instance, what he said to Europe. First it was on again, off again, this and that. He slapped 50%, rhetorically anyway, tariff. The Europeans turned around and said, stop making threats, just negotiate. Then Trump said, hold on, I'm taking off the 50. We had a good call. We're going to talk about it. Apparently Macron, the French president, has told him on various calls, listen, Donald, uses his first name, you've simply got to stop insulting our country. I think that the real question is not just the personality of Donald Trump, but what does this actually mean for American foreign policy? So, Jamie, if we go back to basically Cyril Ramaphosa, and we're going to talk about Putin in a second, because that's all gone haywire as well. So the humiliation or the attempted humiliation of Cyril Ramaphosa in the Oval Office and trying to say that under the ANC, the black majority in South Africa, the whites were being, and these are Trump's words, executed, or it was even worse than apartheid, and they're being discriminated against.
But you do allow them to take land.
No.
You do allow them to take land.
Nobody can take land.
And then when they take the land, they kill the white farmer. And when they kill the white farmer, nothing happens to them.
Well, look, the way I think about this is to distinguish between Trump, the deal maker, the politician, the individual, and American foreign policy that flows from that. What Trump has realized, and in using the powers of the presidency to their maximum extent, he's realized he can play the foreign policy game every day through a phone call, through a meeting, through a tweet. And that is the unique power of the American president, where it's not a parliamentary system. So that's one thing that's happening. Number two is they have thrown away the normal system of policymaking. Just this past week, they basically eliminated half the staff of the White House National Security Council, which used to drive policy from below, where experts, officials would come up with some ideas, push it up to the next level, then to the cabinet level, and ultimately to the president. That's the normal way of doing long-term American policy, so that these policies have traction, that they're thought through, and that they're in our interest. Trump has thrown all that away and decided whatever I think today is going to be the foreign policy of the United States. And he has that power under our system.
America and South Africa have had a long-term relationship. They have a pretty robust trading relationship. Cyril Ramaphosa's aim was to reset their relationship after Trump cut aid, cut ties, and all the rest of it. His foreign minister told me that that's all they wanted to do. Behind closed doors, after all this hullabaloo in the White House, the ambush with the PowerPoint, they just wanted to reset the relationship. And they're hoping that they might have done. Obviously, America is the strongest one. But what does it serve America to alienate Africa? Or, if you listen to some of the experts, America has been, as is Europe, pulling out of Africa. Guess who's going in? The UAE.
The
And the
Chinese.
UAE.
Absolutely. Those both of those countries are going in. You're absolutely right. This is not good for the United States, but it is a reality that President Trump in his last administration called all these countries a nasty word. The shithole countries is the phrase the president used. I'm just repeating what he said. And this time around, people were hoping that in the second term that meeting someone with the dignity and skill of Cyril Ramaphosa, we could get back to a more normal way of doing business. But it's not going to happen. And the problem here is that Africa is growing stronger and stronger. It's got reasons for feeling their oats. And South Africa is considered the leader of Africa, either South Africa or Nigeria, the two main countries. By insulting the South African president, he's insulting Africans, unfortunately. This follows from taking away all the incredible work the United States has done over the years to provide medical assistance to Africans and saved millions of lives through the Gates Foundation, through the program that provided HIV support for killing HIV and treating it. And that's the tragedy here, is that we've been winning hearts and minds in Africa for years and years, going back to when we opposed the apartheid regime. And instead of sticking with that line, Donald Trump has overturned it. President Trump has sided us with the white farmers, imagining some grand grievance against the white farmers. That actually isn't going on, as Ramaphosa explained.
And I was actually quite sad because, and actually befuddled, and I don't even know. Some people say it doesn't matter. He won with that video, but that his aides did not know enough to actually put correct stuff on that PowerPoint, has been exiled from the ANC's a fringe party member. The white crosses, it was easily fact-checked and debunked. It was a protest. It wasn't grave markers. And a lot of the stuff that his spokesperson handed to him, some of it anyway, was said to have been from other countries.
This is what happens when you have foreign policy made, on the fly. American foreign policy matters to the world. What we say, what we do matters to the world. And that's why you have a system to construct thoughtful policies and then construct policy making with foreign governments slowly, carefully. And you don't throw it all away in one meeting. Normally, instead of a meeting happening first, you work with the lower levels of government, you plot up a summit meeting between the two leaders, and you make progress. The way Donald Trump does it is the reverse. He wants to run it himself, frankly, without much advice from any particular experts. And then you have this amateurish moment where they can't get their facts straight, and they put out something that isn't true. And tragedy is that it harms the United States in the long haul. Even if we don't want to devote all of our resources to Africa because we're scaling back, according to Trump, because of his own reasons, why should we alienate them after having done so much for decades to support Africans in their effort to be free and thrive as a people, free of HIV and free of apartheid and free of the rule of the Iron Man, which has been happening also in Africa.
Some leaders, Zelensky did not do it so well, and he got riled up, and Trump got riled up, and Vance piled in, and all the rest of it. But Ramaphosa and his people were much more composed. And actually, there was a funny moment going to the sort of the flattery and the, giving Trump gifts, a bit of this whole narrative, when a journalist got Trump upset about again asking about the $400 million plane from the UAE. And this is Trump's response, but this is what Ramaphosa said.
I'm sorry, I don't have a plane to give you.
I wish you did. I take it. I would take it. If your country offered the United States Air Force a plane, I would take it.
But coming back to this issue, which I really would like us to talk about, and talk about it very calmly.
So it was pretty adept. It broke the ice. Ramaphosa told a joke. It sort of brought down the temperature for a period of time. But what's amazing, I mean, if it was up to me, I would recommend to Donald Trump and his aides and all his cabinet members to watch the great film Invictus, which was about the great Nelson Mandela actually reaching out and embracing and bringing in the white South African rugby team, i.e. the white South Africa. And it was just so beautiful. And of course, Nelson Mandela, for me and for many people, is possibly the most respected world leader in modern times or in any memory. And guess what? Cyril Ramaphosa was his chief negotiator in the, with the Mandela and the white government of F.W. de Klerk. And I remember interviewing F.W. de Klerk, and he told me what an incredible, distinguished, brave, and determined man Nelson Mandela was. And the two of them won the Nobel Prize together for ending apartheid. So it's weird, Jamie, that Trump is casting himself as sort of the self-appointed protector of white people who have had none of their rights taken away.
This is what happens when you, instead of relying on a system of government where you get actual facts and you build it up and you decide what to choose and you have thoughtful pre-meeting meetings, and then you decide how to proceed in a live televised moment between leaders, you don't have these kind of crazy town discussions that are about things that didn't happen and that reflect white grievance. And look, my last job in the government was running partly the information warfare account. And Russia and China work it really, really hard in Africa. And one of the things we discovered, and we revealed it, we downgraded intelligence and were able to reveal it, that Russia was so infuriated by the reputation of the United States for doing good works in Africa, by providing retroviral medicine, by preventing the millions of deaths from AIDS and from other diseases. Russia hated that. And so they came up with conspiracy theories. And then they spread them through information warfare, where they suggested that Big Pharma was using Africans as test subjects in bio warfare. And we were able to reveal this Russian effort and kill it before it could spread. But what it tells you is how much support the United States had for its efforts in Africa, how much that infuriated Russia and China, because it was basically soft power of the United States. And President Trump and his administration, unfortunately, in 6 months have wiped out an enormous amount of America's soft power by killing all the programs to provide assistance, or many of them, and by coming up with these crazy town stories about white farmers. And that's the tragedy here to me as a foreign policy person.
I think we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the stats, Jamie, that you're just alluding to. You may not have even seen them, but in the FT, the Democracy Perception Index has very, very bad news for the United States of America. And we'll also talk about J.D. Vance, and we'll talk about Putin and the latest Trump broadside against Putin. He also gave Zelensky another, slap across
Another
the face.
shot.
Yeah, another shot. And we'll talk about that and some of the behind the scenes stories in the next part. Okay. We're back to continue the discussion. When we left off, we were talking about the Democracy Perception Index. The FT has quoted these figures, which I'm going to read, but it also says that this is becoming a reality TV show, like a spectator sport with all these different installments and episodes in the Oval Office. But listen to these stats because they're worrying, I think. So 45%, Jamie, have a positive impression of the United States. That is down from 75% last year. President Trump is viewed negatively in 82 of 100 nations, while President Putin, the man who's invaded his neighbor, is viewed negatively in only 62 of those nations, and Xi is viewed negatively in 44 of those nations. So Xi is the most popular in these 100 countries, then Putin, and then Trump. Boy,
this
oh boy.
this is what I learned in my 2 years in government. We are losing the information warfare to Russia and China. We are losing the so-called undeclared information war, where Russia and China have decided to spend enormous resources discrediting the United States and promoting themselves. And now, because of the way Trump's policies are being perceived and the president's views are being perceived around the world, it's been added on to negatively affect the United States. Look, on the surface, information warfare doesn't always appear to have a long-term impact, but I can tell you that it does, because what it means is our ability to persuade countries to work with us. To be a leader in the world, you have to have people following you. You have to turn around and have people there. When you have these kind of figures and this kind of rejection of the American leadership role, you can't play a leading role. It weakens the United States and our power in the world. And that's what's so troubling about it, let alone the fact that I've worked in this field for 30 years, building up, I thought, the reputation of the United States for the good things we've done, for the important role we've played in preventing war in Europe and Asia. And unfortunately, in the last few years, Russia and China have attacked us. And now President Trump, through his views and the policies he's pursuing, has undermined us.
Do you think I understand the power of the information war, but isn't it also soft power? Because coupled with the information war, you've got the administration that has severely restricted, if not ended, all the good stuff, so-called soft power that America does, whether it's in health and, famines and crises and storms and all the rest of it around the world.
Exactly. I mean, that's where we've weakened ourselves through these policies that I was describing, by killing off assistance, killing off the Agency for International Development, by stopping the promotion of VOA and other news organizations that people in certain countries need to know what's going on. These are all soft power tools, but because of them killing them off as a policy matter, and President Trump's activities and actions inside meetings and what he says every day, the combination has been deadly for our soft power and our reputation and our real power. Because ultimately, many of the issues we need in the world, we can't do alone. We need to have people with us, helping us confront China, helping us confront Putin in Ukraine. And we lose that when we lose the power and influence through this information warfare.
It seems that America first is almost like America alone. And if not America alone, then it's America mostly alone and also getting things by coercion. The latest analysis of, it was titled Trump's Obsession with Panama. Okay, so you want to make sure that China doesn't get a unseemly, unsafe dominance in that very vital, waterway. But the latest analysts say that the president there has buckled to a lot of Trump's demands, free traffic through for certain American vessels, putting American armed forces in all the different Panamanian bases around the canal and in other places. And the people are now the Panamanian people are beginning to get angry at their own president because they're saying, hey, you're not standing up for our sovereignty. What was wrong with the situation that, America gave us back the canal? So if these people rise up and say, out you go, Mr. President, what if somebody else comes who's hostile to America?
Exactly. But what this is about, there's two issues. One is substance. What do we say? Our policies? The other is the way we pursue those policies. And by pursuing them through threat and through misinformation and coming up with crazy town stories like the white farmer's story that he did with Cyril Ramaphosa, or crazy town stories about the Panama Canal, and then pressuring the governments very aggressively, that's the way the Trump administration is pursuing its policies. You alienate the people in countries that matter, whether that yields a hardliner against you, whether it just weakens the country's support for the United States. I don't know. The real tragedy is some of the points that President Trump is making, I personally agree with. I don't like the idea that a Chinese company has control over some aspect of the shipping lanes in the Western Hemisphere, or in the Suez Canal, or in the East China Sea. And so when President Trump focuses on those things, I think that's the correct focus. But by doing it this way, through insult and pressure, it backfires, and we lose the advantages that it brings us.
And just a quickie, we've talked about the leaders that Trump has sort of, for whatever you want to say, humiliated, ambushed, alienated. But others he hasn't. Like, for instance, Nayib Bukele of El Salvador treated him to a beautiful, as Trump might say, a big, beautiful Oval Office meeting in which he was, lavish praise on him. So it goes both ways. And I guess the question is, we just talked about China, somebody like Xi Jinping, with whom the United States, and particularly President Trump, has a lot of business, in terms of unfair trade and this and that. Is Xi going to subject himself to an Oval Office meeting with Donald Trump under the current circumstances?
Well, I think the short answer to that is no, and that's why they haven't even spoken on the phone, because the way the Chinese system operates is the exact reverse of what Trump does. Everything has to start below, have to be carefully scripted, have to be built from the working level, ambassadors, then ministers, then more ministers, then the head of state, and the meetings themselves, I can tell you, are often, not that interesting because they're performative with the leaders of a country like China, where we know exactly what they're going to say and they know exactly what we're going to say. And it's only over time, by having multiple such meetings, that you develop a relationship that can be useful in a crisis. But to make policy with China, who's now the most important other country in the world after the United States, they're not going to stand for this kind of uncertainty about what will happen. They're going to, even with Biden, who was very respectful, they negotiated every single detail of who would speak first, who would get a camera angle, every single aspect of the itinerary of a meeting. And this unscripted, shoot from the hip, crazy town approach, they're never going to tolerate. And that's why we haven't even, I think Trump has admitted that he's sort of waiting for a phone call from, other than congratulatory call, which I guess he got, a real proper phone call. And that's not going to happen until they're confident that it's going to be done at least halfway the way they are normally doing business.
So this really has an impact. This performance, which Trump loves and he's good at, people say, he's really good at it and he seems to, dominate the space. But maybe it's not good for him or for the United States.
Exactly. You put your finger on it. Look, before we go into the future, I think it's worth reflecting. South Africa is very important for a number of reasons, but most importantly, this was the ultimate test of black-white relations in the 90s. And when I remember vividly, I worked for Madeleine Albright under President Clinton. It was 1994, I believe, and the election was taking place. And this was one of the most beautiful moments in modern history, when the African people could stand up, every single one of them, black, white, and mixed race, and vote for whoever they wanted to. And we were there as observers. But even then, there were complications. For example, I remember we were basically held hostage in our hotel room because the Zulus, led by a man named Buthelezi, were protesting this agreement between the white leadership and the Nelson Mandela's ANC party. He was feeling left out in the cold, and he had his Zulu warriors dressed like Zulu warriors demonstrating all through Pretoria and the other capital city, major cities. And we were frozen in our hotel room when we were supposed to be out sort of looking at the election. And so the history of this country in South Africa, I remember being at Nelson Mandela's speech to the Congress, where tears were in the eyes of members of Congress and everyone who listened to it when he addressed a joint session of Congress. I was a Senate aide at the time under President Biden, then Senator Biden. So the reason why this came off so bad and why you were probably so affected by it is because the end of apartheid was one of the signs that our world was getting to be a better place. It coincided with the fall of communism, and there was real optimism in the world. Communism fell, apartheid fell, these two evil schemes fell. And there was hope that that democratic revolution would spread around the world. Obviously, it didn't, and we're now seeing the backlash. But the reason the Ramaphosa meeting was so painful is because it pricked at a very, very important moment in world history.
I think you're absolutely right. And that moment you're talking about, the awesome sight of the Zulus doing their thing. Again, Ramaphosa was very, very instrumental in talking all of the sides down, the radicals on all sides, on black and white and all the rest of it, on behalf of Nelson Mandela. And, I remember going to Robben Island. I'm sure many people have made that historical pilgrimage, and seeing Mandela's cell and being taken into the quarry with a blinding light, where he would have to spend hours and hours and hours with other prisoners, hacking away at the stone in the quarry, and knowing how he really elevated the fellow prisoners and kept them on the political path, even while in prison, and explained how they had to be in order to come out. And how they had to be was to be able to go towards reconciliation. And I just think that is so incredible. And it was Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk, the last white South African president, who essentially agreed to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So much has been done in that country that is so exemplary, despite all the, challenges and all the flaws that remain, and the poverty and the imbalances, etc. But so much has been done, Jamie. I remember I used to, because of Ted Turner, he used to love to make us cover all the UN side conferences.
Right.
There was the UN Social Progress Conference. Mandela had said he was only going to give one interview, and that's to the host country TV, Danish TV. But I found myself away into the bowels and the basement of this UN establishment.
I'll bet you did.
And I went up to where he was coming out of the Danish TV. And I was, by hook or by crook, I had my pitch prepared and everything. And I was like, please, President Mandela, this is CNN and it goes everywhere. And we were there in your election and here, there, and everywhere. And he came out and I had it all prepared. And I was confronted by the most dignified human being that I had ever seen in my whole life. And so I thought, well, I can't jump at him now. I'll just wait a little bit. And then he kept waiting, and he had all these incredible, people with him, his aides, but not like, you could get, I was this close to him, maybe this close. And I kept following him. They didn't push me away.
They didn't stop
And
you.
finally, I got to the place where he was stood talking to his people. I said, this is it. This is where I'm going to ask President Mandela to do me an interview right here in the basement as we're standing up. Do you know? I couldn't. I was so in awe. And there was something about that magnetic field around.
And even you, who can pretty much say anything to anybody on any given day, couldn't break through that. Let me tell you another South African
But
story.
hang on. It was about him. He was such I'm sorry, I'm just going to say a demigod in terms of how he came out of this terrible thing. He had his past, he had spent 28 years paying for it, both a political conviction and everything else. And he came out like this. And I couldn't. And I never interviewed him.
Another aspect of South Africa that we could talk about, when we took our son to Rorke's Drift, where the Zulus had fought the British, one of the most powerful battles in the white-black history in South Africa, where this group of couple dozen British soldiers held off thousands of Zulus over 3 days, and we had that battle retold to us. So, in short, the issue of you're a British subject, I'm an American citizen, to have an American president seemingly come up with a crazy town argument about
You like Crazy Town. You said Crazy Town a lot.
Well, I think it is because to use these stories that aren't true when you're making foreign policy is crazy. It's not a good way to go. It's not good for our country.
So before we go into, some of the consequences and maybe solutions in the next part of our conversation, just want to end with this dramatic moment before Ramaphosa, and it was Zelensky arrayed against the White House, who, by the way, are all in there. In previous presidencies, did they have all their secretaries, all their cabinet secretaries?
It didn't seem like such a ganging up, right?
No, but anyway, Vance jumped in and delivered his famous, scolding.
Have you said thank you once this
A lot
entire
of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
I wish the United States was going to save Ukraine, as J.D. Vance suggested. I'm very worried about the future of our foreign policy with the likes of Donald Trump at the head of the Republican Party and his vice president, J.D. Vance, basically the second most important Republican. And that tells us a little bit about the future of foreign policy under the Republicans. It worries me a lot.
Jamie, didn't Vance, when he was a senator, say, I don't much care what happens to Ukraine?
You're exactly right. Well, let's talk about J.D. Vance and the future of American foreign policy in the next section.
Okay, we're back. Christiane Amanpour presents The X-Files with Jamie Rubin. who is over there in Washington, and I'm over here in London. So the big picture, Jamie, I guess, is what are the consequences of all of this? And what is the future of foreign policy under President Trump and J.D. Vance? Because he's very, very influential on the foreign policy side. And if he is the heir to Trump, where will it go? So all I can tell you is that I was on the front lines of that battle in February at the Munich Security Conference. And, everybody had come together to give speeches and this and that. And everybody was waiting to see what the new administration will send. Trump sent his vice president. That was a very senior member of the delegation. And people were in the plenary room, all these world leaders and ministers of defense and foreign affairs and intelligence experts and ministers from all over the world. And essentially, he told them off. He essentially told European allies that the whole playing field had changed. He said things that were completely 180 degrees different from traditional American foreign policy, and certainly from the last few years. This is where it started with Zelensky being outed as, the bad guy, and Putin maybe being the ally. And then he told off the European leaders, saying he didn't even think Russia or China were the biggest threats to anybody, but domestic European policy, by which he meant them trying to make
Squash.
sure that
Yep.
extremists didn't win, whether they're extreme right or extreme left.
J.D. Vance is an important figure. Not only is he vice president, but remember, he represents the potential future of the Republican Party. After George W. Bush's administration responded to 9/11 with the wars on Iraq and Afghanistan, the Bush version of foreign policy became discredited, both on the right and the left and in the Republican Party. And it was always going to be a question mark of what was going to come next. Donald Trump was then elected, and he had this semi-isolationist, semi-American first. But then people wondered what would come after that. And I think J.D. Vance, because look, this is a very smart guy. He wrote a very well-received book. He about his growing up in hillbilly country, hillbilly elegy, and then he went through the Iraq War, and now he's turned himself as an elected official into Trump's number one booster, Trump's number one supporter. And what I'm worried about as an American who cares about our foreign policy is that, look, I don't believe Donald Trump will have a third term. I know people worry about it. I'm not worried about that. So there's been some hope in some circles that Trump's second term will be just another blip, and then we can get back to normal American foreign policy. But what I'm worried about is that it won't be just such a blip, that J.D. Vance may turn out to be the leader of the Republican Party. He may win the election. And he's now started to identify what I consider a pretty scary version of American foreign policy, where he's berating the victim of Russia's aggression, Zelensky. Remember, this is the man whose country was invaded. And then he says that we're going to save them when we're not saving them. We've been taking aid away. We're not providing them military assistance. And he tells Europeans the biggest threat to the world is Europeans squelching the AfD, the right-wing party, when the biggest threat to our world, to me, and I say this probably in every broadcast, but I can't say it enough, is we have
podcast.
Podcast, is a Russia that's militarized its entire country, supported in full by 1 billion plus Chinese on the Communist Party of China, fully supporting Russia militarily, economically, diplomatically, and fighting with them an information war. We face these two behemoth countries with extreme powerful capabilities, and we need to gather together the good guys, the Europeans, the Asians, and the other Middle Eastern countries who want to work with us on a world where you don't invade your neighbor and where the bullies don't succeed. And with J.D. Vance running the show, we're going to lose that conflict to Russia and China, I fear.
Okay, couple of questions. The thing is, the everyday changing nature of the policy is concerning to me because I don't understand it. So we've just described how J.D. Vance laid down, a marker at the Munich Security Conference in February. Then, just about a month ago, he went to the same organization, to their headquarters in Washington, and told a different story, that Europe and the United States will always be together. That's the basic, uh, précis of what he said. What is the real JD Vance? What is the real policy?
Well, I don't know. People are going to start looking into this and asking him the hard questions. I think the JD Vance that is fully supportive of Donald Trump for the next 3.5 years is the JD Vance that's going to be seen publicly. There's not going to be any breaks with Trump. He's Trump's number one booster. Trump has been his ticket to leadership of the Republican Party, and whatever Trump says, he's going to be the biggest supporter of it. So I don't think that's going to tell us too much. But what does tell us something, and this is what I've seen, and this is why it's so worrying. Look, J.D. Vance is not a senior official in the Republican Party. He only was placed on the ticket by Donald Trump. The senior Republicans that I know and have worked with, and I'm not going to mention their names because they won't like what I'm about to say, senior leaders of the Republican Party who I've met with privately when I was in the State Department, where I've talked about the threats from China. I've talked about the threats from Russia. Most of them say perfectly rational, thoughtful responses and agree that these are real threats, that America needs to lead an alliance of democratic countries and countries who believe in the world of rules and rights, and that to do that, we need to confront Russia and we need to confront China and we need to help Ukraine succeed. That's what they tell you when you're having dinner with them, when you're having lunch with them, when you're in a private meeting with them. And then somehow Donald Trump has so intimidated these supposedly strong-willed, Republican senators and congressmen that when they speak publicly, they speak a completely different tune. That was my one lesson from 2 years in Washington at the State Department, is the Republicans that I went to brief told me one thing in private and another thing in public. And the thing they said in public was driven by their fear of Donald Trump. And that's a shame, because a real debate about these policies would benefit the United States. And if I would make one last point critical of my own party, is I don't think we did a good enough job over these last decades in explaining to the American people why America should lead in the world, why it is worth our while to defend South Korea, why it is worth our while to defend the small Baltic states, why America in a leadership role where we're paying a large defense budget is in our interest. We didn't explain that very well. And so when President Trump came in and threw all these ideas out that are completely different, many young people sort of agree with him on instinct. Why should we defend South Korea, they say, average 20 and 30-year-olds. And that was our fault, partly, by not putting these policies out there. The Ukraine war, it seemed to me, could have been a great issue to run a re-election campaign on. Do you want to give up on Ukraine and let Russia take it over, or do you want to support the victim in a war? And we didn't do that in the campaign in 2024. And I believe that's one of the reasons why Trump was able to win.
So Bridget Brink, who's a career Foreign Service official, she was ambassador to Ukraine. In fact, Donald Trump, in his first term, had appointed her ambassador to Slovakia, as is apparently usual protocol. When a new administration comes in, ambassadors pro forma offer their resignation. So she did that this time, now in Kyiv. Donald Trump didn't accept it. He wanted her to remain ambassador in Ukraine. But she was so upset about what Vance had said and so upset about sort of conflating enemy and aggressor and victim that she decided that she would resign. So she's an active serving ambassador who's now resigned a few weeks ago. And she basically is saying that, peace at any cost actually is appeasement, and she can't be part of that. Actually, some of these Republicans I also met, whose I won't name, but I met them in Munich, different ones than you met.
You've seen that phenomenon too, right?
Well, they said to me, number one, if we don't do X, Y, and Z, if we don't approve X, Y, and Z, we will be, and this is a quote, MAGA swarmed. That means all the bots, all the loyalists, all the,
So they're afraid, and they're afraid of being MAGA swarmed.
Totally. Plus, one of them told me, then I thought to myself, even if I have X million constituents and I need to have a seat at the table, I need to do as much as I can for my constituents.
That's why they'll give in to Trump.
And then the other one who came out publicly, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Republican senator, said it. She said, look, we are all anxious. Retribution is real. So that's a little bit of a digression back from the Ukraine thing, because again, this is Vance, Trump sort of changing the dynamic about what about Putin? Like with Trump's latest, which we started, so angry. It was it was the biggest one-day attack since the beginning of the war that happened overnight. Several people were killed, and Trump is pissed. But then he says, on social media, Putin has gone absolutely crazy. And I hate what Volodymyr Zelensky says as well. So out of that, where is the policy?
So it's interesting. Look, I think in the first podcast, I was predicting that Trump would tire of the Ukraine war. He would see that it's not so easy to resolve. Maybe this was the second podcast. And so where I think we're going to end up is that President Trump is going to see that his friend Vladimir Putin is not his friend and is not going to do what he asks because he asks him to. He's going to continue the war. He's going to double down on the war. He thinks he's winning. And Trump, unfortunately, the administration is not going to provide the kind of support for Ukraine that the previous administration did, the $60 billion that we got through in the last year. And they will continue intelligence support. Maybe they'll spend out what's left in the cupboard of weapons sent to Ukraine. And then at least I'm hoping, I'll repeat the idea, Trump should use the leverage he has with the Europeans to get them to buy American weapons, the Patriots they need to defend themselves against these missile attacks and these drone attacks and the other anti-missile and anti-drone defenses that United States companies have that the Ukrainians are good at using and have learned how to use. At least encourage, pressure the Europeans to buy those American weapons so that Ukraine can survive this onslaught, because it's not going to go away. And until Vladimir Putin realizes that he's not going to just get what he wants by continuing the war, I don't think he's going to negotiate seriously. And President Trump seems to be stepping back from it. He's angry with Putin, but he's not pressuring Putin to give up, and he's not offering weaponry to the Ukrainians. He's just simply saying, well, I guess this war is going to go on, and it's not Trump's war, he said, because he's trying to avoid responsibility for the war continuing after claiming that he would end it in 24 hours.
Well, look, I think it's endlessly important and interesting, and it really is, sort of business and personality-driven foreign policy, and we're going to have to wait and keep watching. It's interesting that we do this at the end of a holiday weekend, both on my side of the Atlantic. It's what they call a bank holiday. It's called, I believe it's Whitsun. It's the Whitsun. Don't ask me what that means. There's a long way back in history to know what Whitsun is. And over with you, it's the end of the
Memorial Day weekend, where we celebrate our soldiers who died in battle. Nobody wants to see another war, but in understanding what soldiers were fighting for, let me bring you back to one of my favorite quotes from the Clinton era. The speechwriter's name was Don Baer, and President Clinton went to Normandy for one of the major anniversaries, and he described himself and America after explaining what the greatest generation did at D-Day to risk their lives to save Europe, as current Americans we are the children of your sacrifice. I always thought was a very powerful phrase that President Clinton used to describe what happened on D-Day and how the world they saved. And that's the world I want to see survive. And it won't survive if we keep going in the direction we're going.
We can't trash that sacrifice, that's for sure. Okay, X, Jamie, great.
Goodbye, X.
Bye.